Hi everyone, I'm Jane, and today we are going to paint a stormy retreat in a monochrome color scheme using no black paint at all. That's right, we're going to make our own black paint. Stick around for the end of the video where I'm going to tell you who won the giveaway of the wildfire painting from last week. If you haven't yet already, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can paint with me every week, and check out the video description below for a full list of materials. Now let's get started. Now today I have a brand new canvas, and I did actually cover this in gesso. And the reason I used gesso is because it gives it a much rougher and dry surface. And when I'm doing my smoky background technique, which is what I'm going to be doing here, I like having that rough, dry surface because it helps grab the paint, stick it where I need it. It helps me get a smooth blend between the two. But it also helps prevent scraping the paint back off of the canvas the way it can if I scrub really hard with darker colors on a canvas straight out of the package. And I used the Liquitex gesso, but any kind of gesso you have will work. You can even try it without if you don't have any gesso. Now for this painting today, I'm actually going to be mixing these three colors to get black. You could do this with just black and white if you want, but sometimes it's nice to have a color that's not exactly black. And you can actually make black with quite a few colors that you already have. So today I'm going to use Phthalo Blue, Burnt Umber, and Naphthol Crimson. I'm going to start with about equal amounts of each, and we'll see how it looks then. Now a lot of times when I make black, I just use Phthalo Blue and Burnt Umber. But what happens when you add the white is you get a really cool greenish blue color. But today I wanted to try something a little closer to an actual grayish color and not get that emeraldy blue-green color. So I've got my three here and a palette knife, and I'm just gonna start mixing them together. Now you can make black with so many colors. You could take just ultramarine and burnt umber. You could take straight primary colors, red, blue, and yellow, and make black. What you're looking for is to take colors that are complementary, if you're only gonna use two. So blue and orange. Blue and orange are complementary colors, and when you mix them together, they don't really make a very pretty color. But if you add them, maybe a little bit of burnt umber or something else, you can get black. So experiment with some colors and see what you come up with. We'll do a video here soon that shows you a few different color mixtures that you can use to get black. All right, so let's streak a bit out there, and that is quite dark. It's still a little on the blue side. So let's see what happens when we mix it with white. I'm gonna pull just a little bit of white out here, and that's a nice cool gray color, and I actually really like that. So I think my black is done. If it were still a little on the blue side, then I would just add a little bit more of the naphthol. If it were a little on the browner side than I wanted, I could add a little bit more of the phthalo blue. So those are really the only two colors we're gonna use. We're gonna add a tiny bit of cadmium yellow later on, but we're gonna start with these two. So I'm gonna use my number 12 cloud brush, and I am using this brush dry because we're gonna be doing some scrubbing. If you don't have my brushes, there's a link in the video description below to where you can get your own. So let's talk about our color composition for a minute. I want to try and create an image that keeps the viewer looking from one place to the next, keeps them kind of searching around rather than saying, here's where we start, here's where you end, and then they're done looking at it. And one of the ways we can start doing that is with color. So darker areas tend to resist the eye a little bit more. So if we have a heavy area of dark here, then the viewer's eye is kind of going to be pushed, especially if we have a nice bright area over here. It's going to make them travel this way. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to start with a darker sky up here, and we're going to transition to a brighter sky. So I'm going to come into my black and just load up a bit. I'm not grabbing big gobs of paint. See, just a little bit on the end. But I don't want it to be totally dark, so I am going to grab just a little bit of white. And we'll see if that's too dark still, I can add more white. So I'm going to start here in the corner, and with flat foot pressure, so remember the full length of my brush is pressed to the canvas. Flat foot pressure, I'm just going to start scrubbing that in. If you get any areas where you're having a hard time getting it down into the texture, come up on the tiptoe and kind of pirouette like that. Now, every time I go back for more paint, I'm gonna pick up a different combination of my colors. Sometimes lighter, sometimes darker. We just wanna make sure that it gets lighter as it goes this way, but we can have some light spots here and we can have some dark spots here. We just want the overall transition. I'm gonna start just outside of that last color, just lay that in, and then come back with the flat foot pressure and blend them together. Let's go quite a bit lighter here for a second because I know I'm gonna have some lightning over here. So I'm gonna lay that down right outside. And with the tiptoe pressure, remember I'm just using the very end of the brush like I'm trying to scoot something across the floor with my toe. I'm just breaking that transition. If I put too heavy of pressure on my brush right here, I'm gonna lay down a lot of that light color in the dark and I'll lose the dark color. See, because I still had quite a bit of paint on my brush. And anything can be changed. You get a spot that's too dark or too light, just put your other color over top of it with the same kind of pressure. We're not trying to create clouds, so don't focus on making specific shapes. Just get in these little blocks of color that are a little bit different here and there. That was a little too light for me, so I just darkened it up a bit. Still have quite a bit of blue, so every once in a while I can just pick up white and I still get kind of that gray color. See how that looks like just a nice cool gray? It doesn't look like those colors that we use to mix. Every once in a while when I'm using the lighter color, I might not blend the edges so well. So I get that little line of white there, and I think I'll leave it. Kind of looks like the edge of a cloud. In fact, I may take a little bit and just add some in here. I know my lightning is going to be coming from this area, so maybe I'll just make a little brighter spot there right now. That's where my lightning will come from. Now, as I move toward this side, I can pick up less and less of my black until down in this area, I may not pick it up at all. So whenever I do black and white paintings, I always get yelled at by somebody telling me that I'm painting wrong or I'm teaching you guys how to paint wrong. Because there's a lot of people who think that you should never use black paint to get black. But I don't like the word never, especially in art. If somebody tells me that I shouldn't do something or that I'm doing it wrong, I'm probably gonna do it again just to, you know, thumb my nose at them. I do what I want. And I don't see anything wrong with using black on its own. But sometimes you get these really interesting colors and they help set a mood when you use an off black like this, a created black. And you can control what that color is depending on the colors that you use to make the black. I'm excited to experiment with that. I think we'll probably do that here pretty soon. Maybe tomorrow I'll record that. So see how we're getting an overall transition from light to dark, though I do have some light spots and I have some dark spots over here. So again, we're not really creating clouds. but they're being insinuated by the light and shadow that we're putting in. We want this to be one of those stormy skies that's just blanketed. And in a sky like that, you wouldn't necessarily see a lot of individual clouds. Maybe here and there, and that's why we're leaving little pieces like that. But overall, sometimes those super stormy skies are just a big blanket of gray. And that's kind of what I'm going for. Just bring this down a little bit below where you think you want your horizon. That way you don't have to try and fight to make sure that you're covering this up, but you don't need to take this all the way down unless you don't know where you want your horizon. If you haven't decided, then go ahead and take it all the way down. There's nothing wrong with that. Now right here, this paint is dry for the most part. It's not really blending, and I have a really dramatic transition from dark to light. So to kind of bridge that gap, I'm going to come into my dark just a teeny tiny bit, the lightest pressure I can possibly do, that little tiptoe pressure. Barely touching the canvas, and that's kind of scooting them together. And I feel like I have kind of a boring spot right there. It's just all one color. So I'm just gonna pick up a little bit of white and that tiptoe pressure again. We'll just add a little lighter spot in there. Now, if you're not using gesso and you start going over some of these spots that are starting to dry and getting a little sticky, then you might start lifting it off of the canvas. So that's another reason that I'm using the gesso. It just really helps to grab that paint and trap it. All right, so now with the sky being dark here and transitioning to light, we've already started our composition, kind of pushing the viewer's eye this way. But we don't want to stop there because otherwise they can just come over and fall off, and now they've seen everything and there's really nothing else to look at. So I'm going to show you how to push it that way more, bring it back around. All right, let's do our lightning. So I'm going to use this long liner brush. The bristles on this brush are about 3/4 of an inch long, and it's very, very thin. So I've wet it in my jar and just kind of shook off the extra drip. I'm going to come into my white and just mix a little of that water that's in my brush in with some white. Now the fun thing about these long liner brushes is they kind of have a mind of their own, and so they flick around a bit as you use them, and that's exactly why I'm using this one. So I'm going to hold my brush far back. I really want to lose some control with this brush. I don't want to hold it right here and put my hand on my canvas and like draw the lightning. I want the lightning to just kind of come out. So I'm going to hold my brush far back, decide where I want it, and I'm just using the very end of the brush. I'm not going to put it flat on here. And I like this little bright spot that I made. So just stick it there and kind of wiggle. I'm turning my brush a little bit as I go. And it kind of trails out as we get down here. See, we got some wildness right there. Can come back, and when I go to touch the line, because my hand shakes a little and this brush is very delicate, probably not going to get the exact same line, but that's okay. Just kind of shake it and let it go until that white paint stops coming off. And it's okay if you get little breaks. Sometimes in lightning that happens. Let's do something else with this right here. There we go. So it's really a lot like making a creepy tree, just upside down. And you can make your lightning as detailed or as simple as you like. put my hand here and just fill this little spot in a bit more. I don't really like that, the way that little spot got away from me, but that's okay. Because it's lightning, and lightning is crazy. I'm just gonna bold up a few of these spots, and then I might add just a couple more little ends, and then I think I'm done with my lightning. All right, I am happy with my lightning there. I'm gonna go to my number 4 cloud brush. I wet it in my jar and I'm gonna dry it off really well on a paper towel. So it still has a tiny bit of moisture in it. It's not as dry as the number 12 when we did the background. I'm gonna come into my white and just pick up just a tiny bit right on the end, and then I'm gonna tap it off on the plate. I don't want a lot of paint on here. This little spot where my lightning's coming from, I just wanna brighten it up a little bit. So with that tiptoe pressure, I'm just gonna lightly scrub a little bit of that through there. Just to say that the lightning is reflecting off of those clouds a little bit. And actually my lightning is still wet. Maybe I'll wait until that's dry a bit more. All right, dried that off. And again, tiny bit of paint tapped off. And right here where it comes from, that's where I want it to be the brightest. There we go. So I forgot to mention that the direction of our lightning is also helping move the viewer's eye in this direction, since it comes from the dark side and moves over to the lighter side. Now, while I was standing back, I looked and I decided I want this quite a bit lighter right here actually. So even though this is dry, I'm gonna take just a hint more of the white and go over it. But I don't want it to be pure white, so I'm just gonna tap into there. Can you see that tiny little pinpoint that I got on the end of my brush there? Not very much. Just a little bit, and I'm gonna kind of spiral to get it all through there. And now I'll get some white. I'm not worried about going over the edge of my lightning. If I obscure it and I wanna, I can just add it back. But because I'm scrubbing this paint so thin and using so little, it's not even covering the lightning. Much better. Now we have our dark here, and directly diagonal from it is our light, and our lightning moves in that same line between the two. All right, now I'm gonna take this old natural bristle brush, and every time I use one of these, people ask where I get them, and honestly, I've had this brush for so many years, I don't even know. I know that it came in a pack of like a dozen brushes for very little money. They're very cheap brushes. What I like about it is that as I use it, these bristles kind of splay out. So I'm gonna be using this brush quite a bit. And I'm gonna use it dry. We'll see, maybe I'll add some water to it in a minute, but I'm gonna use it dry for now. I'm gonna come straight into my dark color, pull a bit out, flip it over, do the same thing. I don't have globs of paint, but see how I've got it into this chisel point? We're gonna make some trees. So I want the top of my tallest trees over here to be right about at the 1/3 mark. And as they come down, my trees are gonna get smaller and shorter until we get to this lightest spot. And then I'm gonna come up just a little bit more. And what that's gonna do is, remember I said you don't wanna take your viewer and say, start here, end here, just fall off the canvas. Remember that dark elements can help block the viewer in. So by coming up just a little bit, that kind of prevents the eye from falling off. So I'll show you what I mean. So I've got my brush held straight up, and I'm just gonna kind of tap in some trees. Whenever you start losing the shape of your brush, just go back and get a little bit more paint and reshape it. I'm not putting a lot of pressure here. I'm just kind of touching like that. And as the brush starts to break up, see, it helps to kind of insinuate some trees. Now, even though we're going lower as we come across, we don't want our trees to all be the same height and at an angle like that. We can have some taller ones randomly, some shorter ones randomly. Just like with the color, we just want to overall have that movement from tall to short. Don't worry about what the bottom looks like at all. And flip my brush over here and there to get some variation in the shapes. If I feel like I get a spot that looks a little bit too symmetrical, I just go back and break it up a bit. Now back here, where our trees are getting shorter because they're more distant, I'm going to put even less pressure on my brush, just barely touching. And if the paint kind of fuzzes and they start to look a little more transparent, that's okay, they're more distant. Still have a little bit of variation in the height. And as I come back around this side, they're slowly going to start getting taller. And I'm putting just a hint more pressure on my brush to get some bigger ones, to bring them back up this side a bit. So see, that overall shape now is leading us this way, but then we kind of roll. If you think of a viewer's eye as a ball, it's gonna roll down this hill. Maybe it'll roll up here a little bit with the momentum, but it's gonna settle back here, and that's what we want. Now I'm gonna go to my 1-inch flat brush and just load up with my black. Let's come across the bottom here. And I'm using the edge of the brush, not the flat, I'm using the edge. And we're just gonna kind of do those lazy X's across the bottom. Kind of feather it into the base of your trees so you don't see a line there. Lazy X's for the ground. And that's gonna help give us some dimension. So when I say a lazy X, it's like a back and forth like that. Everything's kind of moving downward. Let's pick up a little bit of white with that and do the same thing. I'm gonna start just below that first color, lazy X's and super light pressure. Run up into it so that it blends. Notice I skipped the middle part. I'll come back to it. I'm gonna get more white. And I'm gonna start right here at this lowest point and with super light pressure, flat. I'm not doing the X's, I'm just going flat there. I might just leave that actually for now and come back and do that with my 1/2 inch. We're gonna create a little bit of a river there. Let's keep going, adding a little bit more white every time we come down lower. Super light pressure to dust those two sections together. It doesn't have to be a perfect blend. This is the ground after all. I didn't pick up any more of my black, but I still have quite a bit on there. Now right here, I know that's where I want my house to sit, and it's kind of sloping down like that. My brush strokes are like that. So I want to give a little bit of a flat spot where my house is going to sit. So how I'm going to do that is the same brush stroke. I'm just going to bring it out a little bit more and then down. Just creates a little place for the house so that it doesn't look like it's upright on a super slanted hill. All right, my 1/2 inch flat brush, I did wet it in my jar, and let's go ahead and do our little river. So I'm gonna get just a tiny bit of white. I didn't pick up much at all. I'm gonna start back here and with light pressure, just back and forth. And I did let it blend into my trees here just a little bit. Just kind of scratching out. I can pick up a little bit of my dark, add it in there. Just kind of going back and forth between my dark and my light. Don't try to blend them in. See how I've got this little spot of dark in there? I'm gonna leave that, I like that. Because your water is dynamic. If it's a little river, it's not crystal flat, you know? It's gonna have some little ripples. Maybe the bottom of the riverbed is uneven and making the water kind of bump up a little, or it's flowing really fast. Either way, it's not going to be perfectly flat, so don't overblend your colors. Just work on covering the canvas. And up front, we're gonna have more variation in our colors than in the back because the back is distant, so it's a little bit more blurred out. So see, I laid in a good amount of dark there. I'm just gonna take a little bit of white and just soften the line. Just with the edge of my brush, using very light pressure. Let's just add the tiniest speck of some highlight right back here. If it doesn't blend in perfectly with your ground, that's okay, because we're still gonna add grasses there. Now for our grasses, I'm gonna use the same brush that we used on the tree, and I cleaned it off so it's wet. I'm gonna dry it in my paper towel pretty good. It doesn't have to be perfectly dry, but I want it to be quite dry. Let's start with our grasses right back here. So I'm gonna come into my black and just pull a little bit out. And then I'm gonna tap it to kind of break it up. See how it broke up the end of my brush a little bit? Now I'll come in here, and because this is distant, we don't wanna put a lot of pressure on here and get these huge clumps of grasses. We just wanna insinuate. In fact, I'm gonna come in, I'm gonna grab, see, just a couple little specks of white and tap that until it kind of blends together. So now it's not the perfectly black. I'm just gonna touch the canvas. I'm not putting a lot of pressure, I'm just barely touching. I think that's actually just a little bit too light for that distance. So a little more dark. And that's not gonna show up real well, but it will show up enough to just break up that shape on the ground. Now maybe I'll add that tiny little speck of white. See, I've got like 4 hairs on there with white on it. Tap it into there. Because we're gonna start coming down the hill, and I feel like there might be a little bit more of a reflection there. See, it's very, very faint. Don't let it go too much into your tree line. Maybe just barely cover the bottom of it. And I'm not gonna worry about taking it all the way to the edge of my water. Let's just do a faint amount over here as well. And that's really all we're gonna do for now with our grasses. I'm just adding a little bit more of that dark right here where our house is gonna sit. All right, let's draw our house. I'm gonna use my little number 8 flat brush. It's about 1/4 of an inch wide. And when we make our house, pay attention to where your trees are. If you put your house down here so that the roof is completely below the trees, then I think it's gonna look small and out of place. So I'm gonna put it up just a little bit so the roof just barely cuts into the trees. That's gonna make it seem more in the scene. So I'm gonna come into my white, and it's okay if you pick up a little bit of the black or if the background is still wet. We're just gonna draw it in with the white to start with. So I know I want my roof to be right about here. So I'm just gonna draw a flat line across. It's about 1 inch, 1.5 inches wide. And then I'm gonna come straight down, about 1 inch. Same thing there. And this is probably gonna look like Snoopy's doghouse for just a minute, but it won't once we're done. Make sure those are even. Notice I have my hand placed on my canvas so that I can control that a little bit. And we'll come across the bottom. I'm gonna come in just a tiny bit from the roof and straight down into the ground. You know what, let's whiten it just a little bit more. I'm gonna come out about another 1/4 of an inch or so. We'll just fill it all in with white. Make sure that your brush strokes are going in the direction that you want everything to go. So I'm gonna make my roof come straight down like that. Now before this white dries, let's go ahead and add our highlights and our shadows. So I want this area to be brighter and this area to be darker. So again, we've got that corner to corner thing. Brighter here because the lightning is reflecting on it. Darker here because it's the farthest away from the lightning. So I'm gonna come into my black and just grab a bit on one side. Let's start on our darkest corner. Come right to the bottom edge and light pressure, I'm not using a lot of pressure, just streak it up. Don't worry if it's not blending up there. Don't worry if you have streaks or lighter or darker areas. Let's take it all the way over and it should start fading out. Yep, just like that. Let's go back into our white. I'm gonna start on my brightest corner and super light pressure, streak it down, and now they're gonna start blending. We're getting to that darker area, so I picked up a little bit of my black. Now we have a nice faded roof. And you can keep working that and making it as dark or as light as you want in different areas. I'm gonna go quite a bit darker down here. Maybe just a hint darker up here. And just a little bit here. Wipe that off. Load up with some black. Just a little bit. I have a nice chisel point. I'm gonna just touch the edge of the roof here and make sure there's a nice dark edge to it. I don't want any bright highlights on that edge. Same thing across the bottom here. And a little bit across the top. Just pull that down a bit. Now on the other side, I'm gonna grab just a tiny bit of white, and that black is still blended in there just a little bit, and that's okay. I'm gonna do the same thing here. Just give it a nice bright highlight down this edge. Maybe just a hint right there. All right, let's do this part of the house, the actual house, and then we'll do our little A-frame that's up in the attic. We'll do that part last. So again, with the house, we're gonna have a lighter area and a darker area. So I'm gonna start with my white, really like we did on the roof. I'm gonna just go side to side across the whole thing. I want it to look like it's got siding or planks or logs or something that it's made out of, so I'm just gonna go side to side. Don't worry about the ground, that's gonna be covered up. If your canvas is showing through, kind of like mine is, don't worry about that, let it happen. That's really happening because of the gesso, because of the rough texture that the gesso gives if you don't sand it down. And I didn't sand it down because I wanted that rough texture. I think it'll help add to the look of old weathered boards here. So now on one side I have my dark, and on my other side I have the light. And I'm gonna hold it so the light is pointing up, and I'm gonna kind of start sketching out some boards. See how having the light on the top and the dark on the bottom insinuates a shadow there? Don't put too much pressure. I'm starting to actually put too much pressure as I'm coming down because it's hard to paint around a camera sometimes. On the other side, I'm gonna get more of my dark and let my light start tapering off. But same thing, light on the top, dark on the bottom. And lightly streak it into the previous section. Don't keep them separate so it looks like there's a line down the house that is dark on one side and light on the other. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to look like a striped shirt. We're just giving the impression that there's some boards or something there. Right, a little more dark. Come to the edge and the absolute lightest pressure you can muster. Just very gently drag that dark color over top. We're not trying to obscure the boards. We're just adding a little bit more darkness. I love painting really small like this. To me, it seems like I can much easier get some really nice highlights and details when I'm painting quite small. Just drag some more of that super dark here, especially under the eaves. Maybe we'll do the same thing on the other side with a little extra white. Not up here under the eaves though. In fact, I'm gonna take just the tiniest bit, come from the roof and just gently pull that down. So it's gonna have a little shadow there where the roof is covering the house. I had to move you. I cannot paint in that direction with the camera on that side. The lightest pressure you can do. And of course, you can keep going over it until you're happy. If it starts getting away from you and turning into a blended mess, then just stop, let it dry, and come back to it. All right, let's do our little A-frame eave here. So I'm gonna get my black on both sides. I didn't clean off my brush. I'm gonna start just a little bit above the roof. I'm just gonna touch my brush to the canvas so I get a little line. I'll do another one on the other side. And that's all I'm gonna do all the way down. And I'm letting it come down just a bit below the first roof that I did. If it's not even, it's okay. This is an old farmhouse or a cabin or something. Wipe some of that off and get some white. We're gonna put our brush right back at that edge and just drag it straight down. I'm not gonna go below the roof though. Straight down, and now it kind of looks like there's some boards there as well. Right on that line and straight down. Come from the roof and just up a little to make sure that you got that all covered. And you can even, if you're feeling gutsy or you feel like you have a steady enough hand, let's come in and add a little bit of a shadow. Now, the shadow on this part is going to be different than the shadow on the rest of the house. Our shadow is actually going to be on this side, and our highlight's going to be on this side, because this part of the roof is being blocked. The lightning isn't shining on this part here because the roof is covering it. But over here, it might be catching just a little bit of it. It won't be as bright as this though. So I have a little hint of that black, and again, starting right at the edge of the roof, and just drag it down lightly. Just a hint of it. And a little hint of white. Let's just make sure it's a little brighter on this side. If you lost the edge of your roof, just go ahead and tap that back in now. Let's add a door and a window. So I'm just using black. We'll say our door is right here. Just kind of pull that to the side. Let's make it a little bit bigger than that. And maybe a little window right there. And real quick, let's add a chimney. We're gonna do it the same way as we did the door and the window. Starting in the roof just a little bit, drag it over. Let's get a tiny hint of our white. From the other side, drag it over, just add a hint of a highlight. All right, I'm going back to my old bristle brush, and we're gonna start adding our grasses. Now, again, you can't really see those grasses I added, but it was just enough to break up the lines from our brush strokes, and that's really all we were wanting. So I'm gonna come into my dark, my black color that I made, and just tap straight into it, and tap it out a little bit, because I don't want globs of paint here. Now, in the distance, this is still kind of distant, so I'm not gonna put full pressure on my brush. I'm still just gonna touch. Start there, and I'm gonna bring it over the edge of my house a bit. Rotate your brush here and there so that you can get some different looks. Right over the edge of the door. And down through here a little. Now we're starting to come to the water, so I'm gonna come in here and just grab a few little specks of white and just tap it. See how it's still there, it's kind of mottled, it's not mixed. And light pressure. Bring just a little bit of that into there and start bringing it down. Let's keep a little bit of that dark in there. Whatever you feel like you need to add, do that, but always tap it so it kind of smooshes them together. Notice every time I tap, I'm slightly rotating my brush just a little bit so I don't get polka dots that are exactly the same from one end to the other. Very, very subtle. Let's get a little bit more of our dark. Another little speck of our white. And do some more. Now as we come down, we're gonna add more and more white because it's gonna get a little bit brighter toward us. Let's just take a tiny bit of that up in there. It doesn't have to be real even. Don't create a stripe. You know, don't take a light color from here and just stripe it down. You can have some areas that are darker, some areas that are lighter, just like we did in the sky. You just want it to overall get a little lighter as it moves down and as it moves toward the water. And see, I'm not worrying about trying to cover up that underpainting. That's why we did the ground the way we did, so that if it showed, it would still give the look that we're going for. I have a little spot right in here where I feel like I need a little bit more dark, right at the edge of the water. I'm starting to put a little heavier pressure, but see, my bristles are still not really bending. Oh, that's a little bit dark. A little darker than I wanted, but that's okay. Maybe there's a little hill there or something. Unexpected things happen sometimes. I find it's best to just go with them rather than struggle and try to cover it up. I'm gonna go quite light right here by the water. Just a little heavier pressure there, and more white for sure. But I'm still keeping just a hint of that dark in there. Now the more you go over this, the more you tap into the same place, the more fuzzed out it's gonna get. So I like to just tap it and move on to the next one. And I think that's about all I'm gonna do for the grasses over here. And we'll do the other side. So I'm just gonna kind of wipe that off of my brush a bit and go into my dark. Same thing, let's add some dark in here. Add just a hint of light as we start moving toward the water. That was way too much. I'm gonna do something different here. I'm gonna start working darker, and notice I'm putting more pressure on my brush. It's starting to bend. Now, I don't know, everybody's brush is a little bit different, but when I tap and my bristles bend up, see what's happening down here? I'm getting these little lines that kind of look like grasses, and I really dig that. So I'm gonna flip my brush the other way, and now on this closer area, when I hit, I'm gonna let my bristles bend downward. And that's gonna start giving me some little grass details on the top with very little effort. So again, it's bending down. Now, if you don't have a brush like this, you could use a fan brush. You know, we've done fan brush a couple of times, so you could take one of my videos where we did fan brush and do a similar technique to that here. I'm gonna fill all of this in with the dark. See, I'm not disconnecting it from this area in the back. I'm not creating a line that says, this is a hill that's in front. This all kind of moves this way. It fades from dark to light, back to dark, but we're not gonna leave this all dark. This area is gonna have a little bit more detail because this is kind of where the viewer is standing. Get some of those grasses back in there. There we go. I'm gonna come into my white and just pick up a tiny bit on the end of some bristles. Again, if you're using a fan brush, you just wanna do that the same way. Just pick up the tiniest speck of white on the end of your fan brush. I'm just gonna tap that to make sure I don't have any blobs. I'm gonna do the same thing. When I hit the canvas, I'm gonna let my bristles bend downwards so that these ones kind of poke up a little. And then we get some little grasses insinuated there. I'm not gonna go too crazy with it. Let's finish up our water while we're here. So I'm gonna go to my number 8 flat brush. I wet it in my jar, and I'm just picking up a little bit of white. Not very much, kind of wiping it off a little. Now let's kind of carve out our shore. So wherever you've got some of those grasses that are hanging down, just kind of come in and zigzag around them a little bit. Say that's where the water's breaking on the shore. You can even wipe it so that you don't have a hard line back there. Toward the back, don't put as much pressure on your brush. Remember, the more distant things are, the smaller they appear to be. Just barely insinuating some back here. This is really very similar to the way we did the water in the Impressionist, oh, I don't remember what I called it. I'll put a link in the information iCard up here to it. But this is really kind of how we did the water in that one. And if you lost a dark area that you wanted to keep like I just did there, you can add that back in. So let's do that. Tiny hint of my black. All right, we're gonna do some very simple trees over here, and I'm using my 1/2" angle brush. And I have very little of my color left. Make sure that you mix up enough of your color. I think I have enough to finish. So I wet my brush in my jar. I'm just loading up with a bit. Maybe a little bit of water extra because of the gesso. It is gonna be a little bit drier and toothier. So my angle brush points down. Remember always when you start from the bottom and go up. I'm just gonna decide where this tree is, maybe about here. Bring it up and kind of give it a little bit of a wiggle, a little bit of a natural shape. I'm gonna flip it around so my angle's pointing up. I'm gonna take this one off of the top of the canvas. Let's bring it down again, kind of wiggling a little, putting a little bit more pressure on the brush as we go to widen it out. Just make sure all those little spots are filled in. Let's add another tree next to it. This one I'm not going to make quite as big. And again, giving it a little bit of a natural wiggle. Let's widen it a bit. I'm going to go back to my liner brush, load up with my black. And we're gonna do some branches on here, kind of similar to how we did our lightning. So I'm just gonna start right here, put a little more pressure on it so it's a little bit wider, and just let it do what it's gonna do. If you need to fill in any spots, you can put your hand on your canvas to get a little bit more control. Just gonna widen that a bit and fill it in. There we go. Don't be afraid to let your branches cross over top of the other trees or other branches. I'm not gonna add highlights to my trees, but you could if you wanted to. Let's add one more very small tree, because things are more interesting in odd numbers. So we're gonna do this one here, and I'm just gonna use my liner brush. Back to our natural bristle brush. I've dried it on a paper towel pretty good. I'm just gonna tap lightly into my dark, tap it off so there's not too much, get those bristles nice and spread out. And very gently, I'm just gonna tap in a few leaves here and there. They don't have to be all attached to the branches. Still turning my brush here and there so that I don't get a pattern. Don't be afraid to take it up off the edge of the canvas. And now that our house is dry, we can finish it. So I'm going back to my number 8 flat brush. I've got some cadmium yellow deep hue. Any color of yellow will work. I'm gonna pull out quite a bit, and I'm gonna make another window up here the same way as I did this one. So I'm gonna start here and just pull it over to the side. Let's make it kind of a tall window. And we'll grab just a little corner of white and just add a little brighter spot in there. I want this window to seem really warm and inviting. This isn't a spooky cabin. This is someone's little vacation spot. Cleaned off my brush. Let's get just a little bit of the black. Man, I made almost the perfect amount of black. I'm about out. And I'm just gonna make a little tiny line. Oh, let's see. I'm gonna squish this so I don't get a line that's wider than my window. I'm just gonna touch right in the middle. Just give a hint of a little cross beam in there. If it's kind of faded out, it's okay. There's a light in there. And so we just want to insinuate that that little cross beam is there. One more time, back to our natural bristle brush, cleaned and dried off on a paper towel. I'm gonna come into my yellow and tap just a little bit of it into my brush, and a little bit of white. I didn't really mix them. They're just kind of tapped in there together. And very lightly, I'm barely gonna touch. I'm just gonna insinuate that some of that light from that window is shining down onto the ground here. Not much of it. Number 4 cloud brush, wet, dried off on a paper towel. The tiniest speck of white, and kind of tap it and roll it off. So we just want very, very little. Let's add a little bit of smoke coming out of our chimney. So from right at the chimney, the lightest pressure you can put on the brush, just kind of scribble it around. And we're gonna take it out this way and just go until that paint stops. Remember, you don't want to use too much. If you use too much, you're going to have smoke that goes on forever and ever. It's going to look like the house is on fire rather than a nice little fire in the fireplace. And then I'm going to sign it. So to finalize our conversation about composition, let's just review some of the elements here real quick. So we start in our sky. We have the darker elements and the taller dark trees. Everything, including the lightning, kind of moves down this way to this brighter area. But we don't fall off the canvas because we have these taller trees as well as these ones that kind of bump your view and prevent you from exiting the canvas because there's still something to look at. So coming down through here, we hit these. We may spend some time looking in the trees. The river brings us down as well as the texture in our grasses. The river comes this way, where the brightness in the grass is here. Pull us back up so that we see the yellow on the grass, back up into the yellow of the window, which again leads to the brighter spot of the lightning in the sky. And then the whole cycle kind of continues. There's not really any strong exit points in the painting. Maybe a little bit here in the river, but I didn't want to take a big black line across the bottom of this one. And I felt like the bright area in the grass here was enough to kind of pull you back up, especially since if this is the starting point of where we start viewing the painting, we haven't really spent too much time here. So the river leading that way can draw us up into that area. So I hope that gets you thinking about composition a little bit more and how it's more than just where you put the elements. You know, it's more than just the rule of thirds. There's color composition as well. You know, use colors to push and pull the viewer's eye in different directions. I also hope you enjoyed painting in black and white without using any black with me. And this is probably something that we will explore more in the future. I absolutely love painting in a limited color palette. This is very refreshing for me. So if you guys enjoyed this and you'd like to see more along these lines, make sure to give the video a thumbs up and leave me a comment below and let me know what you think. So this week I'm actually in the middle of moving my studio to my new workspace. So this is the last video that we will film here. And so I haven't had time to finish my finger painting wildfire painting for the giveaway. However, I would like to announce that Elizabeth Lugo is the winner of the finger painted wildfire painting. So Elizabeth, I will send you a message soon and we will get your painting over to you as soon as I finish it, which should be next week, as soon as I get moved. If you'd like to enter one of our future giveaways, make sure that you follow me on Instagram or Facebook and sign up for my mailing list. Some awesome things are coming with my new studio space, and I'm excited to share them with you. Thank you as always for painting with me, everyone, and I'll see you next time.